welcome to round 13 coverage of Grand Prix Pittsburgh. I'm Brian David Marshall, and I am joined in the booth by Jacob Van Lunen. And there you see former Player of the Year Brad Nelson 6 years ago, I think today, that he won that Player of the Year. At least that's what Facebook tells me.
I believe also 6 years ago to the day that Anand Kar won a 600-person PTQ in Paris.
No, he was actually, that was actually his Paris PTQ win, which was like some insane multi-hole, was the Worlds in Paris.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
so
it was
I'm
before that
confusing
one. Yeah.
The Parisian events.
Yeah. All right, so both players are playing black-green Constrictor, but slightly different approaches here. Brad Nelson more of an energy deck, and Anand Kari taking a little bit more of the Delirium route with his list.
Yeah, Anand is playing a couple copies of things like traverse the Ulvenwald and whatnot, so he is dipping into the Delirium plan, where Brad, while not going full-blown energy plan, is dipping into that with cards like Aether Sphere Harvester and Clint Sleeve Siphoner.
Yeah, and here you see the energy payoff for him is this Aether Sphere Harvester, which is a very difficult card for the green-black to deal with, for the green-black mirror match to cope with, right?
Absolutely, and Gifted Aetherborn, a new addition this weekend to a lot of these black-green decks, is actually very good at dealing with these types of cards, because one of the reasons why Aether Sphere Harvester is so good is because there are really no creatures that cost 3 or less that can profitably attack into it, and it's so good at racing opponents. But when you have something like Gifted Aetherborn, you can just attack it at will.
Now here you see something that I think is indicative that you're looking at a Delirium deck. Deadweight, a card that Anand Kari is playing, and that's something because you're really looking to diversify the cards in your graveyard. You don't want all instants and sorceries as your removal spells.
Exactly. He's already got a bunch of Fatal Pushes in his deck, but he also wants to play that one Deadweight because now he has an enchantment in his graveyard, which is going to help him cast Traverse the Ulvenwald and look for creatures. Or maybe cast the one of Ishkana and make some spiders.
So Servant of the Conduit goes down to the Deadweight, and in comes Gifted Aetherborn. And now Brad Nelson untaps and is, ideally here he plays Gonti.
Yeah, I think that would be...
That's kind of what his deck likes to do.
What he wants to do with that 4 mana. But I think, actually, Gonti's usually the last card Brad wants to play from his hand. I think what he would ideally want to do here is play 2 cards on 1 turn if he has the 4th land. That's really, he wants to be double spelling as quickly as possible. That's how he's described this to me. These situations.
So there is Winding Constrictor, spell 1. Here's a second land. He gets another energy from his Ether Hub. It goes up to 5. Sorry, it goes up to 6.
Yep.
Because Winding Constrictor.
Yeah, it's a powerful card.
We saw a weird interaction last round with the Winding Constrictor and the Awaken effect.
Yeah.
Putting the counters in, is it going to put an extra counter or not on that land? And it doesn't because it's not a creature when it gets the counters.
Yeah, if it's, say, a man land that you're awakening that you have already activated, then it does get the extra counter. Or if you've already put counters on it and you're awakening it again, it does get an extra counter.
Yeah, here we see an Aether Sphere Harvester falling to a Fatal Push with the help of a Evolving Wilds to trigger a Revolt.
That's pretty good to spend 1 mana and get a 3 mana threat off the other side of the table. Fatal Push is one heck of a card. And this Gifted Aetherborn, just, so powerful. For 2 mana, you're getting this thing that's just providing a 4-point life swing every turn, and eventually it's going to have to trade with a card from Brad's end.
Very reminiscent of Vampire Nighthawk.
Mm-hmm. In Constructed, I think it's just de facto better.
Yeah, just because even though you lose the flying, being able to play it on turn 2 and just really dictate the game with it.
Yeah.
Being able to play it on turn 2, being able to play 2 creatures on turn 4, play it in a removal spell on turn 3, you get so much flexibility off of it. All right, in comes the Aetherborn. 16 to 24 in favor of Anand Kari, and then he taps 4 mana, and he plays a Walking Ballista with 2 counters.
Yeah, in this matchup, Anand's Walking Ballistas are actually a lot better than Brad's Walking Ballistas because Brad is playing Clint Sleeve Siphoner, where Anand Kari is, only playing 2 drops like Gifted Aetherborn, which are not going to be as susceptible to a card like Walking Ballista.
All right, here's a Verdurous Gear Hulk from Brad Nelson. He's deciding how he's going to allocate his counters. Then once they resolve, he'll get an extra one. You see he's going 3 and 1, which will translate to 4 and 2, thanks to the winding constrictor. Or 3 and 3. He decides.
Yeah.
He decides to go 2-2, split the counters evenly, and then gets in with a 5-6 winding constrictor, and now still has a 7-7 trampling Verdurous Gearhulk back.
And something interesting from Anand's list here is the inclusion of 2 copies of Murder and 1 Natural Obsolescence. So whereas most black
he has
green
1
decks,
natural obsolescence in his main deck.
yes, he does. And where most of these black green decks really are now on just Grasp and Fatal Push as their removal spells, Anand's deck has access to these bigger removal spells, which can actually get a Verdurous Gearhulk with that much toughness off the table for a single card. And Brad is likely not expecting that to be something that his opponent could do. Brad last weekend of the Pro Tour went 8-2 with a main deck that was 1 card different than this main deck. He cut the Murder from his Pro Tour list and added an extra Fatal Push, and that's what's happening.
Did the Murder move to his sideboard?
It did, yes. At a Pro Tour, you really don't know what you're going to play against as much. You need more versatile cards.
All right, here is Rishkar Pima Renegade. Counter, and counter on the Ballista. Ballista goes up to 3. And he's going to pass the turn back to Brad. Pumping the brakes here. And that's another thing about the Gifted Etherborn. It plays defense so well.
Yeah, right now, this 7-7 Trampler that Brad has is held at bay, essentially, by a 2-mana thing.
It would essentially be a straight-up trade here, right? He could trample over for 3, but the lifelink 3 and the Death Touch would just cancel it out.
Yeah, all for this 2-mana thing. A really impressive card.
6 mana. This is going to be a walking Ballista for Brad Nelson. It's going to get 4 counters.
Yeah, which is pretty impressive here.
Yeah, no response from Anand Kari. He doesn't kill the winding constrictor in response. No fatal push here.
And I think he may just use all 6 of this mana just to get that Gifted Etherborn off the table. Just one. He's going to do it one at a time.
Yep. Here you see Anand tapping his Gifted Etherborn and his Walking Ballista for mana, and then animating a Hissing Quagmire.
And that Hissing Quagmire going to do a pretty good job here of keeping Brad's creatures at bay also with that Death Touch. So we're seeing Death Touch as a mechanic coming up big here. What's interesting, though, is that if Brad just passes the turn back to Anand, Anand cannot use this Hissing Quagmire indefinitely for defense, because that means he's not going to be casting spells and developing his board. And that means that Brad's going to be able to just have his way with him with whatever his draw step brings.
And 2 murders in Anand's deck. That's probably the card he's going to be looking to buy time to get to here to deal with that Gearhulk. But Brad's not giving him that time. He's like, you know what? I'm just attacking. So he's going to trample over. The Winding Constrictor is going to do 5.
9, I think, total? Yeah. It's a lot of damage.
Big chunk out of Anand's life.
10, yeah.
You know, and he also gets to, like, sort of pin Anand's resources back there, eating that land.
Yeah. Especially when Anand is, trying to work with a Walking Ballista. Definitely a powerful effect.
Now it's Anand's turn to attack. Gets in for 5. Caps 4 mana, and he's got another Walking Ballista.
And that's scary because here now he's 5 points that can go to the dome.
Yes. So he can chump block here, throw 2, attack, and
That's
really
it.
finish off Brad if Brad has no other answers. And
Yeah.
if Brad tries to sit back and turtle up behind that constrictor, the Walking Ballistas are able to finish those off as well.
No fear, though. Brad attacking with the Winding Constrictor. And Anon may be trying to force Brad to have 2 action spells here and just going to take the damage, but instead he decides to play it safe.
Yeah. Jump blocks, drops Brad to 9 with the ability of the Walking Ballista. And Brad, of course, by that attack, we were pretty sure he had to have something else. And he does have a Glint Sleeve Siphoner, but that's not a great blocker here in terms of that Walking Ballista.
Yeah, we're probably going to see those sided out from Brad. And that we talked about that earlier in the match. You know, the Walking Ballistas for Anand are much better than Brad's Walking Ballistas because Brad is playing those Glint Sleeve Siphoners where Anand is playing the Gifted Aetherborns. And in this matchup, the Gifted Aetherborn is definitely a superior threat. Post-board, Brad has access to a bunch of Lifecrafters Bestiaries. That's going to be an exciting one to watch.
Oh, yeah, that card has just been absurd for him all weekend. Again, I played his Pro Tour list a lot this week on Magic Online, and that was, I thought, one of the absolute best cards in post-board games that he had access to. Yeah, now these guys are sort of playing a little bit of brinksmanship here.
Yeah.
But ultimately, going to remove 1 counter. Ping the Siphoner. And now, Anand can get in for 4 if he wants. Or more with a Verdurous Gearhulk. Taps the Walking Ballista for mana. And this could be a pretty interesting turn here. Can't quite finish Brad off.
He can do 8 points this turn.
Yeah, he can get him to 1.
Yeah, and then it's really scary because Brad, then is just dead to a Walking Ballista activation even. Obviously, he's not going to put him to 1 on this turn, but, a soft 1 because the Walking Ballista is there. He could also choose to put some number of counters on Walking Ballista, in which case he can, use those counters to throw at Brad if need be. So I think that's going to happen here.
2 counters on Ballista. 2 counters on Rishkar. Attack for 5. Brad attempts to make a Hissing Quagmire, but it gets shot down by the Walking Ballista. And Brad takes 4 damage from the Pima Renegade.
And now
he is going to need to find something here. He is outclassed on the board by Anand Kare.
It's not looking good for him.
How about a Gonti?
Who knows? Gonti, Lord of Luxury. We've already talked at length about, just the luxurious lifestyle they live.
Brad's looking for what, a Fatal Push here?
Yeah, I would assume so. I think that the Fatal Push can get the Walking Ballista off the board, and then
he goes
Gonti
3.
can.
He can block the Verdurous Gearhulk
and
then
go to
trade
2.
and then trade with the Gonti for the Rishkar.
Yeah.
But he's agonizing here. I don't think he found a Fatal Push.
No, it does not seem like it.
Did find a... Oh, no, it looks like there is a Fatal Push in there. There's a Traverse
also a
in there.
Traverse.
There's a Grim Flayer in there. And I think that last card is a Verdurous Gearhulk.
It's hard. I think, you kind of want to take this Traverse, but it puts you in an awkward situation because then an activation from Walking Ballista on the next turn could be lethal. Oh, that's what it was.
Look at this. It's the Natural Obsolescence. He's using Anand's own cards against him. This is a card Anand Kari is main decking. He's got it game 1, probably for exactly these type of situations. I believe this is called hoisted by your own petard. And of course, Anand is not going to put it on the bottom of his deck. He is going to remove the 2 counters and do 2 damage to Brad, dropping him to 3. But there is another Walking Ballista, 3 counters on it, and that is enough to finish off Brad Nelson.
Yeah.
Game 1 goes to Anand Kari.
We've seen, that come up so many times throughout the weekend and just throughout the standard format in general. The fact that these black-green decks have access to Walking Ballista, they can shoot the opponent. That's so unfair out of black-green. You're used to the red-white deck playing all these, mediocre creatures and just, getting at your life total as quick as they can and then trying to finish the game off with a couple burn spells. But when you're, playing against the most efficient threats that exist in the format that are also card advantageous and they also get to play with the best removal spells, and then they have this artifact creature that interacts with creatures very well, they can also just dome people, it makes the deck just so good and so versatile.
P.S. Ballista you.
Yeah.
All right, now Brad Nelson.
It also stops the key combo of the format.
Yeah,
it's an absurd card. Yeah,
it's great against the Siheli Rai combo. Now, what is Brad Nelson going to do after sideboard here? What are his best options?
So Lifecrafters Bestiary is very good in the mirror
Card
match.
we were talking about.
He's also got an extra copy of Fatal Push, which I'm sure he's going to want to bring in, and a copy of Murder here. Now, he has 2 copies of Harsh Scrutiny, and those are best on the draw in this matchup. They're one of the best ways to, prevent the opponent from having some crazy Windy Constrictor draw. So he'll definitely want to be bringing those in also. Again, Gonti, very good in the mirror as well. So Brad's going to get to make some nice upgrades here. Glint Sleeve Siphoner, definitely the first card he's going to want to take out of his deck. And Rishgar Pima Renegade is another card that, especially post-board, gets a lot weaker because your opponent is likely to, stock their deck up with a bunch of really inexpensive removal spells, and you'll end up with just, Rishgar often as the only creature that you have on the battlefield when you're casting it.
All right, so we're checking in right now on Omar Belden versus Zachary Keeney. Zachary Keeney just coming off of his first Pro Tour appearance at Pro Tour Ether Revolt, a member of Team Card Hoarder, playing alongside Noah Walker, Jacob Baugh, and those guys. And here he is at 10-2. He already has a Grand Prix top 8 on his young resume. Grand Prix Providence 2016. He's a student from Concord, Mass. Omar Belden is a top 8 competitor from Grand Prix Quebec City. He's from Toronto, and if you've ever sort of heard of the cabal of Magic players like Team Seow's Basement, he's one of those guys. That's the group of players that has propelled Paul Dean onto the Pro Tour and to his platinum success.
Lucas Seow's a very talented player who, was able to transfer that talent to a lot of other people in a very short period of time.
So this is really the big 2 decks that came out of Pro Tour Ether Revolt. You see Mardu Vehicles for Zachary Keeney, Omar Belden, of course, on the Black-Green Constrictor list. And which flavor of Black-Green Constrictor are we seeing from Omar Belden?
Omar Belden is playing an energy version of the deck, but he's actually playing some weird cards that aren't in a lot of the other energy versions. He's playing Duskwatch Recruiter, which is a card we've all but forgotten about. I
was just going to say, it's funny.
That card's so good.
We've spent so much time with the Kaladesh cards, we've forgotten about. You saw people casting Painful Truths or Radiant Flames just, and they're like, oh yeah, that's still in standard.
Yeah, that's
Duskwatch Recruiter. Oh yeah, that's still good. I mean, Duskwatch Recruiter actually is really interesting in this matchup. We were just talking about the Lifecrafter Bestiary for Brad Nelson as this sort of way to just pull away in the game, and that ability to dig through your deck with the Recruiter has got to be great in those grindier, long drawn-out games.
Yeah, the other thing that's really nice about it, too, is that if you are planning a Verdurous Gearhulk turn or something big, the turn before that you can play a card like Duskwatch Recruiter, and it forces your opponent to tap the mana on their turn. Because, they're not going to let you untap with your mana that thing get extra cards.
That's all well and good, though, but Zachary Keeney, he's got the Sky Sovereign console flagship here. So
Big boats.
yeah, he's got the big boat. Let's go back to our feature match taking place on table 1 of the tournament. Brad Nelson versus Anand Kare, Servant of the Conduit versus Grim Flayer, both players with turn 2 action. So you see Brad has access, if he plays a land, to 4 mana on turn 3. Don't believe he has that 4th mana, though, in hand. Does have a Winding Constrictor, does have Ballistas.
Got to be a bit frustrating to not find that 4th land here. You know, the power of a card like Servant of the Conduit definitely is very dependent on hitting your follow-up land drop. If you don't hit that follow-up land drop, it would almost have been better to have just had the 3rd land than the Servant of the Conduit.
A couple different options for him here. He is going to play another Winding Constrictor here on turn 2 instead of playing another Servant of the Conduit.
And the thing is, it's very unlikely that Anand has a way to get up to Delirium on this turn. So he's, leaving open 2 blockers, really preventing Anand from hitting with that Grim Flayer and getting the trigger. And he's going to kind of put shields up. And you don't want to be playing defense when you're on the play, but if you miss a land drop, you're often forced into that type of situation.
And this is not a deck that really pushes Delirium in the sense of grappling or vesseling. I mean, it's really kind of like Grim Flayer's his route to Delirium and just playing the game, right? It's just like something that occurs over the course of killing all your opponent's creatures, having your creatures killed, and using Evolving Wilds often to complete the Delirium package.
And he's forcing through those Grim Flayers just with efficient removal spells. So they're effectively turning on Delirium more often than not for him, and he just wants to make it so that he can pick apart his opponent's board while he plays efficient threats.
So Brad Nelson is going to play, talking about efficient, pays 2 mana for a Walking Ballista, gets 2 counters on it.
That's a really good card right there.
Again, still, really scuffling for his 3rd land.
Yeah, him not being able to double spell here after casting a turn 2 Servant of the Conduit is definitely hurting him a lot right now.
So now it's Anand Kare's turn 4. If he can double spell 2 removal spells.
Yeah, he could end up in a really good spot here.
So he plays Murder, and he's aiming at the Winding Constrictor. Certainly an option to go for the Servant of the Conduit. Your opponent's stuck on mana.
Yeah. It's certainly an interesting option here.
Perhaps thinks, correctly, that his opponent is going to block both his creatures. Doesn't want him to get a Winding Flayer hit in. A Grim Flayer hit in. Winding Flayer, I'm making up cards. And Brad Nelson says,
Boards are
sure.
clean.
And, doesn't use the Ballista to throw tokens anywhere because, again, Grim Flayer has trample.
Yep. Yeah, if Grim Flayer didn't have trample there, Brad could conceivably...
chump block and do some kind of other kind of action. There's an Evolving Wilds from Anand Kare as his 4th land. Here is land number 3 for Brad Nelson.
They trust the 3rd land on the turn where it's absolutely the worst. He doesn't even get to use that extra land right there. And he's playing so many 2s so that he could double spell on turn 3 with Servant and kind of eschewing 3s altogether with his list, really maximizing the value of that card. But here he's getting punished for that.
So now Anand untaps, and he is ahead on development of his mana, but hasn't really been able to press that advantage But Tireless Tracker might change that. Plays his fifth land, gets a clue, and also follows it up with a Walking Ballista. Really, there's this temptation, I think, as a player to not want to play a Walking Ballista there. Like at the kitchen table, you're like, oh no, I can untap next turn and make it a 3. Yeah, that's great. But you really just always want to be using all your mana whenever possible, right?
Yeah, especially in a situation like this where you both have a decent number of cards in your hand, or where you have a lot less cards in your hand than your opponent, where like you're in danger of flood, whereas your opponent is, under some mana pressure. You want to empty your hand as quickly as possible to end the game.
Now, here we see Brad Nelson get to play 2 spells in a turn, plays a Winding Constrictor, then with the Winding Constrictor in play is able to, cast Walking Ballista and take out the Tireless Tracker, but now there is a 5/5 Walking Ballista coming at him.
Yeah, and Anand could put that Walking Ballista in his graveyard and give Brad an empty board and just 3 lands to his 4/4 trample.
And he is going to take out the Servant of the Conduit here, set him back on his mana production. But now the lands are showing up for Brad Nelson. He plays his 4th land. He gets Gonti, Lord of Luxury. He's like, I just want to borrow one of these cards. I'll return it to you after the game.
Yeah, which one do you want to give me?
Always borrowing stuff, that Gonti.
Yeah. And he needs it the least. Gonti's got such nice pillows.
All right. 3 counters on the Ballista.
Everything in the Sharper Image catalog.
Here's a Fatal Push for an Ankara. He's going to take out the Winding Constrictor. Wow.
Yeah.
Here's Rishka Pima Renegade. It's like, you can't... He's like, no, you got to move those counters onto 2 different creatures. He's like, okay, still doing the same thing. Still killing Gonti. Attack for 6. Brad Nelson falls to 9. And he extends the hand. Anand goes to 12-1. He's your tournament leader right now. And this is a guy who has been playing Magic for a long time. He's been a part of the New Jersey Magic crowd. Goes all the way back to the earliest days of the Target crowd. But really playing maybe the best Magic of his career right now. Again, a 9-0 start at Grand Prix San Jose 2 weekends ago.
Pretty
and now,
impressive.
Round 13, here he is at 12-1. Kind of pacing the field. We've got some more Magic coming up for you, but first we have take a little break.